Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwynne. I'm Oliver Gwynne, and this week we're going to delve into career paths and opportunities. And I've got some sort of unrelated stories about careers that maybe will be interesting to you. You all know you're just here to watch me ramble. So, opportunities is something that I've been talking about a lot recently, and it's something I was thinking about this week. And I'm going to come to the reason I was thinking about it second. But first, I wanted to start with a story about two friends that I had who recently they left university. I think one left maybe a year earlier than the other one, and they both needed their first sort of proper job. And in both cases, they had an opportunity that came to them that wasn't good, wasn't a good opportunity, wasn't what they wanted. But one of them took it, and the other took it, but didn't do such a good job. So one of my friends, she got several job offers at the same time, and some of them seemed to be in better companies. But because you have to sign what's in front of you at the time, she decided to accept an offer with this company. She almost sort of didn't sign anything because there was another company that said maybe they wanted her and who didn't actually sign her in the end. But she took this opportunity. It was more junior than she wanted. She already had experience, but the company said, "Hey, we'll mentor you. We'll give you opportunities for promotions, all of this kind of stuff." And so she was a little bit reluctant to take it. I think she was still getting her head turned by the other opportunities, but she took it. And that company turned out that they were true to their word. And so within about 6 months, she got a promotion. She's been given extra responsibility. She's got a mentor. She's really thriving there. And obviously, that's down to her own aptitude and attitude, and not just sort of taking the opportunity for granted. But it's great. It's really paid off for her. Now she's got a better job and it's in the field that she wants and all that kind of stuff. And so she's thriving in that thing, but only because she didn't overlook the initial opportunity to begin with. My other friend, she was desperate for a job. Anything would sort of do territory. And so I reached out to a mutual contact of mine. He needed some admin work doing. So she was doing this admin work and it wasn't what she wanted to do. And he just needed anybody to do it, really. It didn't really matter to him. But I was speaking to him recently, and unfortunately, she didn't do a particularly good job. She was very slow. She kept saying she had other things on her card. And he was like, "Well, I thought we were doing this." And so it didn't really go anywhere. She didn't even finish the job. And so that was the end of that. But I spoke to him recently, and now he's hiring four people in the position that she was originally interested in. And he said to me, that position wasn't really about the admin. I needed that done. But really, for her, it was an opportunity to meet the team, to ingratiate herself, to show what she was about. And if she had the skills and we could see it, she'd have been the first person to get that job easily. Instead, somebody else got that opportunity who went and did the admin world and showed a good attitude. And so I think that kind of demonstrates the fact that opportunities don't always come in the shape or size that we expect. Quite often they don't come. Quite often we are too afraid of those opportunities. I think it was Thomas Edison that said opportunities are missed because people it's dressed in overalls and it looks like work. And so people dismiss opportunities because they seem ordinary or they seem demanding, but they don't really realize the bigger picture that people have in mind. And so maybe that's a lesson in our careers, especially earlier in our careers, that we shouldn't take anything for granted. Sometimes people have something in mind that we can't quite see. And it's just good to get our foot on the ladder and then take the next opportunity from there. Because once you've got one job, it becomes easier throughout. The second story I had to share was that I'd recently made friends with some people who are in the media business. They produced commercials and this kind of thing. And that's obviously what I was doing for a large portion of my life. Interestingly, I think these people kind of thought I was going to be boring. They're like, "Oh, data." And I was like, "Yeah, I know exactly your world. I did that for like 6 years." So if you don't know, I used to run a media production business. I did that and then sold it for 6 years. I was like 26. I was afraid of burnout. But I was also kind of thinking like, what does this look like in like 5, 10 years? Because I feel like it's going to look exactly the same. The problems I have today will be exactly the same. Yeah, at that point, I'll have mastered how to deal with them, but I kind of felt like I'd already done that a bit. Yeah, maybe at that point, the money is a bit better, but I'm still going to have to find clients. I'm still going to have to deal with people's creative visions and all that kind of stuff. And so I decided to take a different path. And in speaking to these people, yeah, that was completely confirmed. I saw that, hey, they're still dealing with the same problems that I'm dealing with, but just 10 years later. And things are not so stable for them, even though they've got jobs. A lot of them were freelancers still, or they were on contracts, or all of this kind of things. They were outside of IR35 in most cases. And so it made me really reflect, like, oh, that was actually a good decision. And it was a more risk averse decision. And I'm certainly not somebody who's particularly risk averse, but it made me contemplate that, hey, actually, I'm kind of glad that I took this path. I was afraid that it would uh, spoil my chances of long term in terms of romance and in terms of like buying property and stuff. And now, I bought property this year. And so I'm really happy that I made that decision. At the time, it was a huge decision for me. It was really worrying and it had a huge effect on me selling my business for like 6 months. It was still like, oh my God, I can't believe that I've sold my business and I missed it so much and all this kind of stuff. And I guess that goes to show maybe the lesson there is that sometimes we're all guilty of thinking of just the next step and the next step. And we're programmed to just think of what's the next pot opportunity. I'll hop to this job, I'll do this. But in my case, I really started to think about, well, what does this look like in so many years? And people are guilty of just going, I'll be doing this, but I'll do it for a bigger company, or do this, but for more money. And I realized that the problems that I had doing that would be the same problems, basically, that my day-to-day life wouldn't necessarily change even if I was doing it for a big company versus a small company. Just, the budget that I would have to manage under circumstances would be different. And so sometimes you have to realize the variables that are at play in the decisions that you're making and understand if they're going to change in the long term. Because often I feel that people are unhappy at work, not because of the company or the manager, but because that is the nature of the job and it will always be the nature of the job. And so when we think long term about opportunities, we have to really go back to those variables that we control, those things that we're really good at, and recognizing what those are, which also ladders up to my third sort of story, which is that I have a lot of friends who are in high profile jobs, people who literally earn twice as much money as me for named companies that you would go, oh my God, I wish I had that job and all that kind of thing. I just had a really interesting conversation with somebody the other day, off the back of me telling them about the media people I met recently, and they sort of were telling me about the job and all that kind of stuff. And I said, I wouldn't trade places with you. And they said, what do you mean? Because obviously they're kind of used to people stroking the rig and going, oh, that's so cool and interesting. I said, well, I wouldn't want to trade places with you because I think when you add in the hours that you have to work, because this person's always working evenings and weekends and sometimes until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, which is exactly the reason I stopped my business, because I was working till 1 o'clock in the morning a lot of the time. When you add those hours in, probably per hour, you and we maybe earn relatively the same money, but you're dealing with a much higher level of stress probably than I'm dealing with. I have a level of stress, but it's not too bad. And at the same time, you have to deal with something that you can't control, which is that you work for a bigger company and they could just randomly lay off 100 people or whatever at any given time. They could do a restructuring. And even though you might be amazing at your job, you would lose your job, which is not really so much the case in small and medium sized businesses. And so I said to them, I wouldn't want to trade places with you. And that was an interesting conversation because I don't think anybody had said that to them before. And it also made me think that, yeah, I think all of us we don't think long term in their careers. We just think about we'll go to a big company and we'll do that. But there's only so many people in that position. And I sort of recognize the fact that I've done some really cool things for really big companies, agency side, but I haven't really, worked for a big company. It's not on my CV. I don't think, if I love Disney, we all know I love Disney. If Disney came knocking tomorrow, I don't think I could get a job at Disney. I don't have the CV for it that they'd be like, oh my God. But I work for some cool companies. I've done some really cool stuff. I've actually worked for Disney for an agency in the past. But I don't have that career on paper. And so I get to dip my toe into that world without having all the negative things about it, like the slowness and the hierarchical nature and all of that kind of thing. And so when I was thinking about career paths and opportunities, I was thinking that it's really important to understand where you thrive and what you value, the variables that make you a success in any given situation, and if you can realistically change those. And it's also important to think about um, be realistic with your outcomes. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to look for. I want to be head of marketing at Apple or something, or something like that. But also realize that maybe you can do a lot more good in a different kind of position, or you have to go sideways to then go up. In a lot of cases, because opportunities come to you that you might not be expecting, like when you're starting your career. And so you might have to go left field or take a different route, and you might find more enjoyment in doing those things. This week, I was announced as one of the top 100 most influential people in marketing by Technology for Marketing. Shout out, guys. My agency has won. My agency, 173 Tech, won most impactful data agency. A couple of years back, I won most impactful consultant in London. You know, that's been a really left field thing to do, to go from marketing from data, but really paid off for me, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm adding value to projects in a way that I wouldn't necessarily know that would happen. But I could have easily gone, you know what, I know marketing and I'll stay in my place and blah, blah, blah. So sometimes I think a little bit of uncomfortability is a good thing, and not dismissing opportunities because they're not perfect and they don't align, which is often the case in life. When you're dating somebody, it's not so often that the perfect person comes along, and you have to maybe give somebody a bit more of a chance, or look at things from a different point of view. Otherwise, you never know who you're going to let go for fear of wasting your own time or anything like that. Richard Branson once said, if somebody offers you an amazing opportunity, but you're not sure you can do it, say yes, and then learn how to do it later. And we'd all like to say that we embrace this carpe diem spirit, but I think that's not really the case. People are generally risk averse. They know what's familiar, and they know what is safe to them, which is understandable because we all have mouths to feed and lives to lead. Sheryl Sandberg said something sort of interesting or similar in Lean In, is that if you're offered a seat on the rocket ship, don't ask what seat, just get on, because opportunities don't come labeled with certainty. And I think that's very true. There's plenty of cases where people had an opportunity that came to them. Maybe it wasn't right at the time. They didn't want to see it through. They didn't want to take the risk. And so it passed them by. I don't know if you know this, but there are three co-founders of Apple. You all know Steve Jobs. Most of you know Steve Wozniak, but there's also Ronald Wayne. I always want to say Ronald McDonald. He was a co-founder of Apple for 12 whole days, and he sold his 10% stake for $800, which today would be worth hundreds of billions. Now, obviously, at the time, he's not psychic. He didn't know Apple would become Apple. Nobody knows these things. Easy to say with hindsight, oh, that was a dumb decision. But also, he got in bed with those people. You think he'd stick it out a little bit longer than 12 days. And maybe he said that he admitted he didn't see himself as a visionary like Jobs or Wozniak. He underestimated the potential. He couldn't quite see what they could see, but he got into bed with them. He could have had his $800. He saw something there, but he didn't quite stick it through. And sometimes if you stick it through, wonderful things can happen as long as you have the right attitude and the right aptitude. These have been my thoughts this week on Gin for Gwynne. Let me tell me in the comments, comment people, please, about times you took a career gamble and it paid off.